Just how much money can you expect to pay when you're trying to get your house onto the market and to sell it? My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm a realtor in South Central Alaska with Keller Williams, and my mission is to help you to build an intentional and a significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching you in real estate. And today we're going to be talking about kind of a touchy topic for some people, and that is how much money does it cost for you to sell your property? Now, when I get a chance to sit down and go over these numbers with you in more detail, this is going to be a lot more precise. And keep in mind, a net sheet is always just a net sheet, okay? It's not designed to be specific, concrete, accurate numbers all the time. It's just designed to kind of give you a ballpark estimate of what we would be looking at and kind of give you an idea for what you can expect to walk away with after paying for all the expenses. So I'm going to talk about the expenses. They're usually going to be stuff that you're going to be paying for. These are going to be kind of the general stuff. There's always going to be some little fee this, some little fee that. So that's going to be in there, but this is going to be kind of the big rock stuff that we need to be looking at. I am not going to be discussing my normal brokerage split in this video. So if that's something that you're trying to find out, we can certainly discuss it at that point. It really kind of depends on the specific property and what your situation is. I have been known to kind of be a big softie for some people in some really bad positions. So that'll just be between you and me though. But yes, I will discuss everything else on here just to kind of give you an idea, and we can discuss brokerage splits at a later time. But before we get started, do make sure you get this video a like, and if you haven't done so already, do subscribe, and let's go and jump into today's video. One of the bigger expenses you're going to be paying up front is what's called a owner title policy. So what a title policy is, that is the policy that the title company will create that protects the buyer's interest in the property. And it pretty much says, the title company says, we have gone back, we have verified the chain of ownership with this specific property, and Mr. Seller does in fact have the legal right in order to sell it, and Mr. Buyer is now the new owner for the property. The reason that they have this is because back in the olden days, somebody could come up a couple years after it's closed and said, hey, so-and-so didn't have the right to actually sell this property. It was bequeathed to me by my sister's aunts, uncles, blah, 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 and it in fact belongs to me. Back in the olden days, there wasn't a whole lot of good recourse on how to solve that, and so that's where the title company policy came from, where they just step forward and say, hey, no, so-and-so owns this property, it belongs to them, you need to go away or we'll see you in court. And that's what a title policy does, and that's why it's so important. So when we as the seller provide it to the buyer, that's kind of just our way of saying, hey, we're on the up and up, and this in fact does belong to you. Keep in mind, most of these expenses are going to be negotiable depending on the loan lending. But yes, this by and large is going to be a seller expense, and anything asking the buyer to pay for this, you're really going to get some weird looks, and a lot of people are probably going to tell you to pound sand. But the expense you're usually going to see on the title policy really depends on the price of the house. I see usually anywhere from about $1,000 to about $2,000 for most houses, depending on how expensive it is. And this comes out of closing. It's not a check that you have to go and write yourself. The other expense that people are really going to look at is going to be the escrow settlement fee. So this is just kind of a fee that's put in there for the folks working on escrow to make sure that they're being compensated for running all the behind the scenes numbers, making sure all that stuff balances out, and for actually managing the escrow account. Now, another fee or expense that might pop up is things like a resale certificate if you're in any kind of an association or a condo association, and HOA transfer fees. This is really going to depend on the HOA. It can be anywhere from like $50 to a couple $100 or maybe even more. I mean, there's nothing really in writing that I found anyway that says exactly how much this has to be. So that's really kind of on a case-by-case basis. The other thing that really can show up from time to time is if you have a house that's on a well and a septic, if you are in the municipality of Anchorage, that is usually going to cost you about $2,000 to have the engineer go out there, look at it, evaluate the system, and then it gets sent over to the municipality for somebody in the office over there to write it off on it. and say that it's good to go. It usually costs about $2,000 here in the municipality. In the Mat-Su Valley, it's going to cost about $500 because they don't have the extra step of having to send it to the bureaucrat with the city to have them sign off on it. Also, in Anchorage, if it's a steel septic tank, the system automatically fails and the new tank has to be installed. New tank, or new plastic tank or concrete, whatever you decide to put in there, but either way, it's got to be a new thing at that point. What they say is, technically it has to be excavated up out of the ground so they can visually inspect it, which after 30 years on a steel tank, it's going to be corroded. You can poke a hole through it with a ballpoint pen. So that can get pretty spendy too. Not really in every case is it going to be applicable though. Let's take a break here real quick. For those of you who've been watching for a little bit, you know that I host an online seller seminar every last Saturday of the month. So this upcoming couple months here is going to be June and July. So that'll be on June 25th. And on July 30th, I'll be hosting an online seller seminar as well. These are very kind of laid back, convenient seminars in which you can ask any questions that you have as you're just trying to dip your toes in and get this whole real estate thing all figured out. So if you have questions and would like to get those answered, then certainly do feel free to RSVP to one of those events. I'd be happy to meet with you at that time and kind of meet and see what questions you have. Now let's go and finish up today's video. Now the final expense that's customary as of now in order for the seller to cover is the appraisal. So this is 100% backwards from what you have in most other states. Most other states that's considered a buyer expense because the appraisal is something that involves the buyer's loan. So you would think the buyer would pay for it. And I'm not sure how we got to the point where it's customary for the seller to cover that expense, but it's customary here, and usually it's going to be upwards of about $900 or so. Sometimes it's going to be bigger if the property's like a fourplex or something like that, but usually it's going to be upwards of about $900, lower end like $750 or something like that. Now there's some other expenses too. Let's just assume for a minute that you're paying any expenses, closing expenses, prorations, prepaids, anything like that for the buyer. That can get factored in there too. Another thing that might get factored in that I'm always thinking about is we're not going to usually be able to just get the property and sell it without doing any repairs whatsoever, unless we are really looking at an aggressive price cut. I know nobody wants to do repairs. Nobody wants to price their property in a way where they actually can get away with that. Okay, it's expensive, usually way more expensive to price it to where someone's willing to take it as is than it is to just have a handyman or contractor go in and take care of stuff. But you do have to budget for that. Usually I'm going to be on the higher end and just say like $2,000 or so of expenses. Sometimes it can be more. So it really depends on the specific property. If you bought it like a year ago and it was a brand new construction, I'm probably going to say, yeah, I want to say we're probably not going to do a whole lot of repairs on this one. So I'll back off of kind of the general rule of $2,000 for repairs. But this is just kind of a general overview of how much it's going to cost in order for you to sell the property. Usually the bulk of your expenses is going to be, as a seller, most of the expenses is going to be in the brokerage fee. And the reason that it's set up that way is because the buyer is already coming up with the down payment and the earnest money and reserves and everything else, and the seller is walking away with a big pile of cash. So that's the reason. And if you were to put the responsibility for the broker expenses on top of the buyer in addition to all of that, really nobody would be able to buy anything right now. So that's the logic behind why it's set up that way. It's not written in stone either way, and it's customary for a reason because it works for the most people. So I sure hope this has been useful for you. If you'd like to talk about brokerage fees and all of that and all the services that go along with it, do feel free to reach out to me on my website down below. I do not discuss brokerage commissions or anything like that because it's just numbers and it doesn't actually tell you anything until I have a chance to actually talk about what services I actually do provide. So I sure hope this is useful, and we'll see you next time.